The road was never meant to be crowded. US Route 50 cuts across Nevada like a thin scar through stone and salt, stretching for hundreds of miles between towns that barely register on a map. At dusk, the asphalt turns the color of ash. The mountains sink into silhouette. Wind moves freely across the open desert, unchallenged, uninterrupted. On the evening of October 12th, just after sunset, a state trooper noticed a vehicle pulled onto the shoulder near mile marker 214. It wasn't uncommon. Engines overheat, drivers grow tired. Gas gauges are misjudged in places where the next station sits 70 miles away. But something felt wrong. The car was parked neatly, aligned with the white line. The headlights were off. The windows were closed. No visible damage. No shattered glass. No skid marks cutting across the gravel. Inside, a wallet rested in the center console. A cell phone lay face down on the passenger seat. The keys were still in the ignition. The engine was cold. There was no one in sight. Beyond the shoulder, the land flattened into a wide basin of dust and brush, broken only by distant ridgelines that dissolved into blue haze. No nearby buildings, no side roads, no lights flickering in the distance, just open land stretching in every direction. If someone had walked away, there should have been footprints. The soil near the highway was soft, a mixture of sand and fine gravel that held impressions easily. There were none. No tracks leading into the desert. No signs of struggle. Earlier that afternoon, the driver had been seen at a gas station nearly 100 miles west, smiling briefly at the clerk while paying in cash. There was nothing hurried about the interaction, nothing that suggested distress, a long drive perhaps, a quiet one. But now, as darkness settled over the basin, the vehicle sat alone under a widening sky, its presence more unsettling than reassuring. On a highway known for isolation, breakdowns are expected, disappearances are not. Somewhere between one town and the next, along a road defined by distance and emptiness, a person had stepped out of their car and vanished without leaving so much as a mark in the dust. On America's loneliest highway, silence can stretch for miles. That night, it swallowed someone whole. Until that evening, Daniel Harper was not the kind of man who drew attention. He was 32, soft-spoken, methodical, and known for planning his life in careful increments. Friends described him as steady, the type who returned calls, paid debts early, and double-checked maps before leaving home for any trip. He worked as a civil engineer in Sacramento, spending his weeks reviewing infrastructure reports and his weekends hiking trails along the Sierra Nevada. The drive across Route 50 was not reckless adventure, but a planned shortcut toward a conference in Ely, where he was scheduled to present 2 days later. He left just after sunrise, texting his sister a photo of the open road and joking about finally crossing America's loneliest highway. She responded with a laughing warning to watch his gas gauge. He replied with a thumbs up and said he'd check in by dinner once he reached Ely safely. The route itself demands respect. Between Fallon and Ely, there are stretches longer than 70 miles without services, where cell signals fade into nothing and mountain ranges rise without warning. In summer, heat shimmers above the asphalt. In autumn, the air turns thin and cold once the sun drops below. He had reviewed the route the night before, marking fuel stops and estimating arrival times with quiet precision. At 9:14 a.m., his phone pinged near Silver Springs. At 11:52, another tower logged him outside Austin, Nevada. The pattern was predictable, steady, linear, exactly as expected that morning. At a small gas station near Eureka, surveillance footage showed him buying coffee and a bottle of water. He asked the clerk about road conditions ahead and listened carefully to the answer. There was no argument, no visible stress, no sense of urgency in his movements, only routine travel conversation. By early afternoon, clouds had begun to gather over the basin, casting moving shadows across the desert floor. Weather reports later noted a brief temperature drop, but nothing severe. Still, the wind picked up, pushing dust in low currents across the highway's edge. Visibility remained clear and traffic stayed light. At 7 p.m., Daniel called his sister again. The connection crackled, then steadied. He mentioned how empty the land felt, how the silence seemed to press against the windows. She laughed and told him he sounded like a travel writer. He said he'd be in Ely before dark, no problem. That was the last confirmed conversation. At 4:10, his phone registered a final tower ping near a desolate stretch west of Ely. After that, the signal went dark. No distress call, no text message, no indication that anything had shifted from ordinary to irreversible in the span of minutes alone. When he failed to arrive at his hotel, staff assumed a delay. Conferences often begin with late check-ins. By midnight, however, his sister noticed her messages remained unread. She tried calling again. It went straight to voicemail. The calm certainty of the morning began to fracture into something colder, unfamiliar. By the next morning, she had filed a missing persons report with local authorities in White Pine County. Dispatcher's cross-referenced his last known location with highway patrol logs. There had been no reported accidents, no road closures, no emergency calls from his number. The highway remained open and uneventful overnight. Friends struggled to reconcile the silence with the man they knew. Daniel was not impulsive. He had a presentation saved on his laptop, notes meticulously organized, reminders set for the following week. His future was mapped in calendar alerts, weeks stretching ahead clearly defined. The contrast was stark. A man who measured fuel margins down to the mile had somehow vanished along a road he had researched carefully. The highway was designed for distance, not disappearance. Yet somewhere between predictable checkpoints, certainty had given way to a blank space on the map without explanation. Investigators would later say the timeline was clean: departure, fuel stop, phone call, final ping, nothing erratic, nothing to suggest panic. But absence can be its own disturbance. When a pattern ends without warning, the silence that follows feels less like chance and more like interruption, deliberate, sudden, unseen force. Before search teams assembled, before headlines circulated, there was only a family refreshing their phones and staring at a map of Nevada. A thin line of highway cut across it, stretching through empty basins and quiet mountain passes. Somewhere along that line, normal life had shifted into something vast, unknowable. The first indication that something was wrong did not come from a crash report or an emergency call. It came from stillness. At 6:42 p.m., a passing motorist noticed the sedan resting on the shoulder near mile marker 204. The sun had already dipped behind the Shell Creek Range, leaving the basin in a muted blue haze. The vehicle's lights were off. No hazard signals blinked against the fading sky. It appeared simply paused, as though the driver had stepped away for a moment and would return at any second. The motorist kept driving. Nearly 40 minutes later, a Nevada Highway Patrol trooper traveling eastbound observed the same vehicle in the same position. In a region where abandoned cars can become survival situations within hours, procedure required a welfare check. He pulled in behind it. Dust lifted briefly, then settled again. The interior told a quiet story. Wallet in the console, identification untouched, a half-finished bottle of water in the cup holder. Daniel's phone on the passenger seat, powered off or drained. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken glass. No deployed airbags. The tires were intact. The gas gauge read just under half a tank. The keys were still in the ignition. The driver's door was closed but unlocked. The trooper scanned the surrounding ground with a flashlight as twilight thickened. The soil near the shoulder was soft enough to hold impressions, yet there were no clear footprints leading away from the vehicle, no drag marks, no second set of tire tracks veering into the desert. If Daniel had walked into the basin, the desert had erased the evidence with unnatural efficiency. A check of the license plate connected the vehicle to the missing persons report filed earlier that morning. Within the hour, additional units arrived. Red and blue lights flashed against the empty horizon, a surreal contrast against the vast darkening land. Search procedures began immediately. Officers combed the immediate area on foot, moving outward in widening arcs. They called his name into the wind. They scanned shallow ravines and brush clusters where someone might have stumbled or collapsed. The temperature dropped rapidly once the sun disappeared, desert heat replaced by a sharp and penetrating cold. There was no answer. By 9:15 p.m., a thermal imaging drone swept the terrain surrounding the highway. The screen displayed only rocks retaining residual warmth from the day's sun. No human outline, no movement across the open flats. A K-9 unit arrived shortly before midnight. The dog caught Daniel's scent from the driver's seat and circled the vehicle repeatedly, confused. It moved several yards toward the desert, hesitated, then lost the trail entirely. It was as if the scent simply stopped. Investigators widened the perimeter at first light. Helicopters scanned deeper into the basin. Volunteers from nearby communities joined the effort, forming search lines across miles of open terrain. They inspected abandoned mine shafts, shallow caves, and dry washes that cut through the landscape like fractures. Nothing, no clothing, no footprints preserved in shadow, no sign of a fall. Cell phone records confirmed the final tower ping at 4 p.m., roughly 12 miles west of where the vehicle was found. After that moment, the device transmitted nothing. There was no outgoing distress call, no attempt to dial emergency services, no message left half-typed. The timeline narrowed into a fragile window. Between 4:10 and 6:42 on 2, something had occurred. Traffic data suggested only a handful of vehicles passed through that stretch during those hours. Investigators began contacting drivers identified through toll logs and surveillance footage from distant gas stations. None reported witnessing an accident. None recalled the man standing beside the road. One long-haul trucker remembered seeing a parked car near dusk but assumed it belonged to someone taking a photograph of the mountains. There were no reports of suspicious vehicles lingering nearby. Daniel's financial records showed no unusual withdrawals. His laptop remained in the trunk, untouched. His conference materials were still neatly packed in a leather folder. There was no sign he had planned to leave the road, no camping equipment removed, no indication of a spontaneous hike into empty terrain. The environment, however, presented its own quiet threat. Desert exposure can disorient even experienced travelers. Dehydration alters judgment. A simple decision to step out of a vehicle can spiral into fatal miscalculation. Yet seasoned search coordinators noted that even in cases of exposure, some trace usually remains. A body discovered within miles, a shoe, a jacket caught on brush. Here, the landscape yielded nothing. As the second day closed without discovery, tension shifted from urgency to unease. The absence of evidence began to feel heavier than evidence itself. Investigators re-examined the vehicle for mechanical failure. Diagnostics revealed no critical malfunction. The engine had not overheated. There were no warning lights logged in the system. Everything pointed toward a voluntary stop, but not toward a voluntary disappearance. By the end of the third day, the official search radius extended across nearly 100 square miles. Maps were marked. Grids were completed. Still, the desert offered only wind and silence in return. Somewhere between the final phone ping and the fading light of dusk, Daniel Harper had exited his car along a highway defined by emptiness. And then, without leaving a single clear trace behind, he was gone. By the fourth day, the search had shifted from rescue to reconstruction. Investigators began with the most probable explanation: exposure. The Nevada desert is deceptive. In daylight, it appears vast but navigable. At night, it becomes disorienting, depth collapsing into shadow, distances stretching beyond perception. A person stepping away from their vehicle without proper gear can succumb to hypothermia or dehydration within hours. It was a logical theory. If Daniel had exited the car believing help was nearby, or attempting to gain cell signal from higher ground, he may have misjudged the terrain. Panic, once triggered, narrows rational thought. A wrong turn, a missed landmark, a gradual weakening. But search teams had covered the surrounding basin extensively. Helicopters traced ravines and slopes. Volunteers walked grid lines across unforgiving ground. Even in harsh conditions, remains are usually found within a predictable radius. Here there was nothing, no fabric caught on brush. No disturbed gravel, no trace of a path. The desert, while vast, rarely erases a human being completely. The second theory introduced a darker possibility: foul play. Route 50 is not heavily trafficked, but it is not abandoned. Long-haul truckers, cross-country travelers, seasonal workers moving between towns. The isolation that offers beauty also presents vulnerability. A stranded motorist is visible from miles away. A stopped vehicle becomes an opportunity. Investigators reviewed traffic data from the narrow window between Daniel's final phone ping and the discovery of his car. They contacted drivers identified through surveillance hundreds of miles in either direction. Most had no memory of the sedan. A few recalled seeing a vehicle pulled over, but nothing unusual surrounding it. There were no signs of struggle inside the car. No fingerprints beyond Daniel's own. No indication that another vehicle had parked alongside. Gravel shoulders tend to record disturbance clearly. Yet the ground remained undisturbed. Still, the possibility lingered. Crimes committed in remote environments benefit from silence. A brief encounter, a forced departure, a body transported elsewhere. Without witnesses, even a small act can dissolve into vastness. But investigators lacked a motive. Daniel carried no large sums of cash. His bank accounts remained untouched. There were no suspicious calls in his records. His digital life showed no hidden contacts, no encrypted conversations, no trace of conflict. The third theory was the most unsettling in its simplicity: voluntary disappearance. History records cases of individuals who leave their lives behind without warning. Financial pressure, emotional strain, a desire to start again. Some vanish by design, abandoning vehicles as decoys. Authorities examined Daniel's finances carefully. His savings were stable. No recent withdrawals. No life insurance policy adjusted in suspicious ways. His apartment lease had months remaining. His presentation materials were complete. Future meetings scheduled, reminders set. There was no evidence of preparation. Friends described him as cautious to a fault. Not impulsive, not secretive. He had purchased conference tickets weeks in advance and confirmed attendance with colleagues. Nothing in his behavior suggested a man preparing to disappear. Investigators also considered mechanical or medical causes. Could a sudden health episode have compelled him to step outside? Toxicology speculation surfaced briefly, but without a body, such lines of inquiry stalled. The vehicle's diagnostics revealed no carbon monoxide leak, no electrical failure that might have caused confusion. As days turned into weeks, comparisons began to emerge. Other isolated highway cases, abandoned vehicles discovered under ordinary circumstances, their drivers never located. Statistically rare, yet not unheard of. In each instance, the terrain itself complicated resolution. Some locals spoke quietly of the highway's strange reputation, long stretches where perception warps, where distance plays tricks on the mind. Such stories carried no evidentiary weight, yet they added to the unease. Officials maintained their position. The most plausible explanation remained accidental exposure, vast land, difficult conditions, an unfortunate chain of decisions, but plausibility is not proof. No remains surfaced during seasonal shifts, no skeletal fragments revealed by winter wind, no belongings unearthed by time. Each passing month deepened the absence. The case file grew heavier with paperwork, lighter with answers. 3 explanations stood side by side: accident, crime, choice. Each contained logic. Each collapsed under scrutiny. The facts remained stubbornly minimal. A parked car, a final signal, an empty horizon. In the space between those facts, uncertainty widened, and the highway kept stretching forward, indifferent to explanation. Years have passed since that October evening, yet mile marker 214 remains unchanged. The asphalt still cuts through the basin without ceremony. Wind still moves across the same pale stretch of gravel, where Daniel Harper's car once waited in quiet alignment with the road. The vehicle was eventually towed. The shoulder returned to its natural emptiness. Travelers now passed that point without slowing, unaware that for a brief period it became the center of a search that yielded nothing but questions. Daniel's name remains in state databases, missing, active, unresolved. His family still marks October 12th with silence. They revisit timelines, re-examine maps, reconstruct possibilities in conversations that circle back to the same fragile window between 4:10 p.m. and dusk. They live with the tension of not knowing whether he walked into darkness, encountered someone unseen, or made a decision no one anticipated. Uncertainty has its own weight. In many disappearances, there is at least a fragment to hold onto. A recovered item. Here, there is only interruption. A life moving forward in predictable lines, then suddenly erased from the visible world. The highway offers no explanation. It does not confess to accidents. It does not reveal hidden violence. It does not clarify intention. It stretches forward exactly as it did before, indifferent to the absence it carries. Perhaps the most unsettling part is how ordinary everything appeared. A routine drive, a scheduled conference, a simple stop along a quiet road, nothing dramatic, nothing chaotic, and then nothing at all. Somewhere along America's loneliest highway, a man stepped out of his car and vanished without leaving a single trace behind. The desert keeps its distances. The silence keeps its secrets.